Okay, so the last issue I want to cover in class is the issue of abortion. And, a few reasons for this. It's definitely an important moral issue. It's definitely one that is controversial, which, having said that, I do want to remind you guys to always be respectful of other people's opinions on this, other people's views. Um, but I also think, for reasons we will get into, it raises a lot of really important issues with the moral theories we've been talking about, brings out both some of their strengths and some of their weaknesses for thinking about, well, moral issues generally. We will see that with Kantianism, utilitarianism, and virtue theory. They're all going to have something to say about this. Um, but, in doing so, they might say some things that, however you come down on this issue, you're going to find a little distasteful. So, keep that in mind. This is one of those issues that will, I think, help us see, how these theories work. So, anyway, just a high altitude sort of survey of the abortion question itself. And, I think there are some people who come down on this side that, abortion is always, always wrong. End of story, right? Other people who come down equally far along, not morally problematic. You'll have some people saying, Judith Jarvis Thompson and Aunt Marianne Warren, who I'm not going to have you guys read. I will talk about them. But I think both their articles are kind of needlessly hard and meandering. But, you know, they make claims like, well, it's no more problematic than a bad haircut or a surgery like an appendectomy, right? That's also a pretty extreme opinion, right? That abortion is not morally problematic in any way. I think most people, whether they lean more toward pro choice or pro life, come down somewhere more in the middle, right? And for most people, I think, questions about how far along is the pregnancy? Is it viable? Does the fetus have abnormalities, genetic abnormalities or other issues? Is the mother's health or life threatened? And did the pregnancy occur because of rape? These are all questions that most people think are relevant in the morality of abortion and also come in probably, you know, and whether it should be legal or not, right? All right. So, but to come to the question that I think most people find most important in this issue of abortion, and that is the question of personhood. And you want to be careful with this term personhood because it is a very loaded, very unclear term. We might mean a lot of different things by personhood. You know, sometimes we mean legal personhood, in the sense that a corporation can be a person, it can sign contracts, it can sue people, it can be sued. That's not what we mean. Apple is a person in the legal sense. No one thinks it's a person in the moral sense. So, what do we mean by a person in the moral sense? As I said, it's a complicated, controversial question, but at base, what we mean is, moral persons deserve a certain kind of respect. The respect that we accord to other human beings, other human persons. One way you might put this is to say they qualify for a certain very high level of moral standing. Well, what does that mean, right? Well, think of it this way. You know, most people think there's no issue with destroying an inanimate object, right? I'm looking at, a very nice ink pen I bought myself, and, you know, I'd feel sad if I did it, but, nobody would think it's all that morally problematic if just on a whim I just snapped the thing in half, right? Might be stupid. You might think, well, I should give it to another person, but I haven't wronged the ink pen, right? The ink pen in itself is not a thing that deserves moral consideration. If there's anything moral here, it's just an issue of, well, how does this affect other people? My ink pen, if for some stupid reason I want to destroy it, that's an issue for me, right? At worst, you might think, well, look, instead of just destroying this nice thing, you should give it to somebody else. But the thing itself doesn't deserve any moral respect, right? Now, animals are a different matter. You know, you can't just shoot a dog or a cat because you feel like it, most of us would think, or be mean to it. But again, they don't have the same level of moral standing that people do, right? You know, in certain situations, we can argue about this back and forth. Some people will give animals more, some less. But a lot of people think you can kill an animal just because you want to eat it. Nobody thinks that about a person, right? Even if you're a vegetarian, most vegetarians would think it's way easier to justify killing an animal than a person. You know, if there's a dog and you can save the dog or you can save the person, even if it's a not very nice person and it's a very nice dog, you should save the person, right? Human beings have a certain level of moral standing that animals do not. We can argue about how high a level of moral standing animals have, but practically everybody would say it's easier to justify hurting or killing an animal than it is a human being. And if you can save a human being or an animal, practically everyone will say save the person, right? That's what we mean by saying a human being has a certain very high level of moral standing. An ink pen or other inanimate object, even a nice one, doesn't have any moral standing. An animal probably has some, but not anywhere near the level that a human being has. Well, okay. The question then is, when we get to abortion, when we talk about is the fetus a person, we're really talking about this question of moral personhood and moral standing. Does the fetus have a level of moral standing? If so, is it the same level that adults have, or is it something more like an animal has, right? Well, to answer that question, we have to get to the question, we don't often think about this because, when we see another person, we don't ask, well, is Bob or Sarah or, whoever, are they a person? We just know they are, right? So we don't usually ask what features qualify human beings for moral standing. But when we think about abortion, this question becomes very important because we have to ask ourselves, well, does the fetus possess these features? We don't ask them when somebody is talking to us in the hall or whatever, because we know that they have those features. We know they're a person. But the fetus, it might be a little less clear. So we have to start to ask what features qualify something for moral standing. And this question of personhood seems like it answers two other questions. When is abortion immoral? And when should abortion be legal or illegal? And the question really is, does the fetus have the same level of moral standing that you and I and other people do? Now, I don't want to assume anything here. So it might be that at some points of the pregnancy it has it, at other points it doesn't. Who knows? So I'm being deliberately vague here. I'm saying, well, if when fetus is not a person, then it seems abortion not immoral or not seriously so, right? Even if we think it has some moral standing on the level of, other animals or something, might probably not immoral, And it should definitely be legal, right? Why? Because we think that people have a right to do what they want with their own body, and that is a pretty heavy right. And for most people, the only thing that trumps it is the right of another person. If the fetus is not another person, the right that women have to do what they want with their own body trumps any rights it might have, right? On the other hand, if when the fetus is a person, it seems that abortion should almost always be illegal. It seems like it's very seriously immoral. Killing a person is immoral in almost all cases. Self-defense might be an exception. Doesn't seem like that will usually apply here. And we do think the government should protect persons, right? That is one thing the government should do. People left, right, and center agree on that. Now, we'll come back to this because the first theory I want to talk about is utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is actually going to be somewhat surprising in that it does not care at all about this personhood question. So it seems like the personhood question will be important. Most utilitarians are going to say, I don't care. Why? Well, think about why that might be. Review what you know about utilitarianism, and we will talk about that in the next lecture.